As writers, we often absorb elements from the world, the places and the people around us. We observe, we ask questions, we speculate, we listen, we watch, we feel. And we write so much of that down, which gets reintegrated like some sort of sausage creation into the stories and words and worlds we share with our readers. Thanks for the Inspiration episodes are an attempt of mine to acknowledge and say thanks to the people, places, and things that have helped to either feed the muse or perhaps just to feed the very soul and makeup of the writer behind the writing. In this episode, I pay tribute and say thanks for the inspiration to Jim Turcott, a teacher, a mentor, a dear friend, and ultimately somebody who truly inspired me.
Welcome to the Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing podcast. There has never been a better time for writers. More information, options, and opportunities are available to you, but navigating these requires insight. Join Mark Leslie Lefebvre as he draws upon more than a quarter century of experience as a writer, a bookseller, and a trusted book industry consultant to explore and reflect on the writing and publishing landscape to help you make informed choices on your writer journey.
Hello, Reflectives, and welcome to episode 290 of the Stark Reflections podcast. This is your host, Mark Leslie Lefebvre. Today's episode is one of my Thanks for the Inspiration episodes, and in this episode I pay tribute to somebody who remains an inspiration to me to this day, even though it has been way too many years since the world lost Jim Turcott. So I'll be focusing a little bit on this teacher, this mentor, and ultimately this friend of mine who inspired me when I was young, inspired me when I got older, and continues to inspire me to this day. And that's coming up later in this episode. First, let's hear a word about this episode's sponsor. This episode is sponsored by Findaway Voices. Findaway Voices is a platform that authors can use to get their audiobooks out into the global market of more than 43 retail and library platforms. Those platforms include places like Apple Books, Audible, Spotify, Google Play, Kobo, Barnes & Noble, so many other platforms, including all of the major library wholesalers. So if you're an indie author or you have the rights to your audiobook and you're looking for ways to get that audiobook produced, you can check out Findaway Voices. They have access to a project-managed process where if you're looking for a professional narrator, you fill out a form saying what you're looking for, and they'll use a project manager on their end to find from the thousands of narrators that they have in their professional queue, they'll find you the right narrator. They usually give you a choice between 5 and 10 of the best narrators that they think would be perfect for your book. Or if you're more of a DIY kind of person, you can use their Findaway Voices marketplace where you can go and look for narrators that you want to work with. They provide options in terms of Voices Share, where you can kind of collaborate with your narrator to pay a little bit less for the upfront fees, and then you split royalties with your narrator. But you also have options like promotional opportunities, and speaking of which, I'm currently in the middle of a promotion for one of my Canadian werewolf books. It's a 2-book bundle called The Bundle of Fears and Frights, which contains the novels Fear and Longing in Los Angeles and Fright Night's Big City from my Canadian werewolf series. It is $1.99 available on Chirp audiobooks, and also pretty much the whole rest of the series is discounted. So you can pretty much get the whole entire series for less than $10. But that ends February 21st if you're interested in that. But you can participate in phenomenal promotions like this from Findaway Voices, including getting access to download codes for Spotify to get people to listen to your books on Spotify and leave reviews. Because as we know, authors love reviews and benefit dramatically from reviews. But if you are looking for how you can leverage a platform like Findaway Voices as an author, you can check them out over at starkreflections.ca/Findaway. And that's the sponsor for this episode But I would also like to pay a warm thank you to the patrons who support this podcast over at patreon.com, with a thank you to new patron Plotter and to existing patron Joanne Carson for increasing her monthly donation. Speaking of increasing donations, thank you, Joanne, for that increase, and I appreciate it. But I want to let you guys know that going forward, I'm going to be changing my patron levels so that all levels get all the content published to Patreon, regardless of the patron level, regardless of the level you donate per month. So it can be $1, $3, $5 a month, or some other amount if you want. And I had people donate at a higher amount. All the new content that I post from here on in will be accessible by all people. Now, I did have it so that if you're at the $1 level, you didn't get access to the audio feed and some of the additional content. At the level 3, you would get additional videos and stuff like that. But I am trying really hard in my publishing efforts to ensure accessibility. And $5 a month comes to $60 a year for somebody. And while I appreciate that, I also recognize that we are kind of recession-ish. We're heading into a recession if we're not already in one. And you know, people have to pull their purse strings a little bit tighter and make a dollar last a little bit longer. So what I want to do is I want to aid in that effort if you're looking for ways to cut costs without having to completely abandon access. So again, regardless of what level you're comfortable with, I want you to have access. Now, I'm not going to have the time to go back in to all of the content from the last 6 years and go back and change all the level things. I may have some time to do that in the future. Right now, I'm not. So it's only going to be for, well, I did do that occasionally as a surprise for people, as a sort of a, hey, look, it's bonus. But going forward, it's just going to, all the content I put there is going to go to all patrons, regardless of level. Because like I said, I want to ensure that writers, you know, if you're closer to the beginning of your journey, you may not have the higher level of disposable income. I want you to still have access to the content because you're supporting me. And again, you can do that for, it's $12 a year, so it should make it a lot more affordable. And it may seem counterintuitive for me to remove the levels and reduce the price so that people at any level can gain the full access to the extras. And I'm sure that there are patrons out there that are happy to be providing with the higher monthly amounts, you know, $5 or more that some people are putting in there. And to you folks, I say a huge thank you. I really appreciate that. Your generosity of all my patrons is greatly appreciated. But I wanted, again, to level the field a little bit, at least, and ensure anyone who's a patron can gain access to all of the perks that I publish from this point going forward. I will, of course, find out relatively soon if it was a good idea for me long term, because it could mean if all my patrons decide to go to the $1 level, well, that's going to be a significant reduction in my monthly patron funds. And again, the sponsor of the podcast, as I mentioned, pays for the hosting of the show, and currently, right now, it's as the hosting costs increase with volume of downloads, etc., so too does the money that I charge them, because it's per 1,000 episode downloads, and so that's been matching itself nicely. The whole idea of the patron support is, you know, for a chance for you to say thanks for your time in putting this together. It is not a requirement in any way, shape, or form. I want this to be completely free. The podcast itself is free for everyone. This is just a little something extra for patrons and people who want to, you know, feel that they want to contribute. Anyways, feels like I've got my hand out and I'm begging, which is always really uncomfortable, especially for us authors. We're not good at selling, right? So I just wanted to share that information with you, and I kind of went on way too long as it is. Why don't we get into a very brief personal update and a bit of an introduction to this episode. So I am going to skip comments. I'm going to get back to them in the next episode. Just very brief personal update. And the update is that I had started to do back in 2020 some episodes of the podcast called Thanks for the Inspiration. And this was just a chance for me to say thank you to people or about people if they're no longer with us, like the case of today's guest of honor. and just to acknowledge what they mean to me and how they've helped me in my writing journey, or even my personal journey and my life journey in different ways. And I'm actually disappointed in myself that I did not do a Thanks for the Inspiration episode since 2020. It's 2023. I mean, I let 2 years go by without doing that, and that's on me. And I've thought of it. I've thought, oh, I should do this for so and so, and I should do this for so and so. Now, I was just recently inspired, and I'll explain that in the main content of this episode. But that's just something I've been reflecting on, is not pausing to take the time to think about all of the people who helped me get to where I am and be the person that I am today. And that's why these episodes are valuable for me personally. And I hope that in listening to my reflections on people that have inspired me, that may remind you about those important people in your own life who have helped or inspired you along the way. So that's it for the introduction. I'm just going to play a quick bumper, and then we'll get right into the main content for this episode. Thanks for the inspiration, Jim Turcott. As I sort of alluded to just prior to this main segment, I was inspired to do a Thanks for the Inspiration. I saw a friend of mine, Jim's daughter, post on Facebook on the 31st of January. A photo of her dad, post-retirement, because I mean, I rarely knew Jim without the mustache, but this is a picture of him without his mustache, which I think he shaved off after he retired from teaching. And she had said, my dad would have been 72 today. And Jim died young, unfortunately, just like his father. His father did die. I believe his father was in his early 50s when he died. And I saw that post from Jim's daughter, and it touched me because Jim's wife and his wife Cora and his daughters Vicky and Lisa are amazing people. This is wonderful, wonderful folks, and their father Jim was a truly stellar man, and that's why I wanted to reflect for you the importance that Jim Turcott played in my life and continues to play in my life to this day. So let me get into this. Jim was a teacher. He was a mentor, and he was a friend. And now I purposely say it in that order because that was the order of our evolving relationship. Jim Turcott was a teacher at Levack District High School in Levack, Ontario. The school no longer exists, that high school. The building still is. And my dad worked at the high school. My dad was a custodian there. And this is a small town, about 2,000 people. And I believe my high school had maybe 300 students at any given time. Jim was a math teacher. He was a physics teacher. He taught calculus as well as general math. At the higher grades 12 and 13, 11, 12, and 13, you would have algebra and calculus and there's something else. I'm not gonna, another math, but so math was not my strong suit. I was more of an English kind of guy. And yet, English was my thing, but I bonded really well with the math teacher. And I'm going to get to that later on. But interesting that you would think that I would, avoid the math teacher like the plague. But that was not the kind of person Jim Turcott was. Jim Turcott was, well, let me just quote quickly, because I'll explain this. Jim died on June 30th, 2008. He died suddenly. Now, he had recently retired from teaching, but he still tutored high school students. It's his passion, his real passion, and and you could see it on him, was helping them understand and appreciate his own passion and love and adoration for math and calculus and physics. And it was an evening where I believe he was either preparing to have a student come over, because he was still tutoring after he retired, or the student had just left. And he was sitting on the couch with his wife, Cora. They were talking, smiled. His head lay back, and he died right there on the spot. Very similar to the way his father died. The story that Jim had relayed, I remember him relaying, he and his brother were in the car, and they were young, and their father was either in their late 40s or early 50s, somewhere like young, and he just pulled over onto the side of the road because he felt something was wrong, and he died. He died there on the spot. So, sometimes this happens in families. But anyways, he died peacefully with someone he loved, doing something that he loved. The reason I shared that is on my blog in July 1st, 2008, I posted my thoughts about Jim and how much he meant to me. And among the comments that I got, this was part of the comment from Jim's wife, Cora. And I think this really illustrates something important about Jim. And she said, "We all have our favorite teachers, and Jim was glad to have so many of his former students turn into lifelong friends. He saw every person as a person first, someone with which to exchange ideas and laughs. Age and sex didn't seem to figure in his mind's connection with that person. Jim was very proud of all his students, but especially the kids from LDHS, Levack District High School. So many of you went on to do such wonderful things, like write books." So Cora was talking on my blog, so obviously he was referring to me. "He would also say to you, live long and prosper." And the reason I share that live long and prosper is Jim was a huge, huge fan of Star Trek. And his love for Star Trek was infectious. But let me go back and just share a little bit of how and why Jim is so important to me and how he inspired me. Because to say that, Jim was just a teacher, just a mentor, just a friend, is really an incredible understatement of fact. In addition to being the head of the math department at Levack District High School, he was also the student advisor to the student council, where I played a role as student council president in 1988. And as virtually any student who had Jim as a teacher over the years, over the decades would tell you, he was one of those unique teachers that you'll always remember. He was a gem of an instructor who cared and gave it his all in the classroom. He wanted to ensure his students got as much as possible out of it. I think he wanted his students to love math and calculus and physics as much as he did, but he would take them at least understanding it and somewhat appreciating it. But he gave the same to teaching as he gave to extracurricular activities. So he was a faculty advisor, and he was also a coach. And again, because with a small school like this, the teachers just did so much extracurricular activities. And as I mentioned before, I was never really all that good at, or even interested in math. But Jim had a way of transforming it for me into something that I could have a bit of an interest in, that I could at least understand a little bit better. Because I'll never forget this one time during one of our, we had lots of long conversations because when we worked together, and I'll explain the multiple ways we worked together over the years, it would require the two of us being in a vehicle for a long time or working together. And of course you're going to have these long, meaningful conversations. And what I loved about those is, though I was young, I think I was probably about 15 years old when I started DJing with Jim. Yes, because he was also a DJ. I'll get into that in a second. But he never treated me like a young person, like a dumb teen who doesn't know what he's talking about. Like Cora said, he treated me like a person. He treated me with the respect you would give an adult. Now, he still recognized I was a student, and there's certain things you don't say in terms of students and younger people. And so he was very conscientious of that, but he also treated you with the respect he would give another adult, and he would listen. And that goes so far. Because usually when you're a teenager, you're rebelling against your parents, and your parents treat you like a kid, and then you behave more like a kid, and I never had that. Yes, as a student who screwed up, he would put me in my place, but he would also, have meaningful conversations with me that remind me of the kind of conversations that John Keating, the character Robin Williams played in Dead Poets Society. Talk about those meaningful things that just go beyond what you're learning in the class. And he would do this in class, and he would do this in other conversations. But anyways, during one of our long conversations, I was going on, as I knew everything because I was a teenager. I'm going on about the value and the importance of creativity. That the world needs writers and artists and people who thrive like that. And I was trying so hard, to impress Jim and the world with my vast and unlimited knowledge as a teenager. I probably bored him to tears with some of my long-winded babblethons about stories I was working on, and me just trying to be all, adult and philosophical and intelligent sounding. He never once showed signs that he was bored or rolling his eyes or anything to me. Like I said, he treated me with respect, which I always appreciated. But during one of those conversations, I remember Jim pausing and explaining to me that solving a complex math problem was a perfect exercise in creativity and discovery. He said, you enjoy that discovery of writing, that creativity that's involved in a story and the elements you put together, because you're putting together a construction of elements to get from point A to point B to point C. There's the story structure, and that's a creative process for you. Well, for Jim, knowing X and Y and solving for Z. I'm Canadian, see, if he was American, we'd be solving for Z, but solving for Z. Trying to solve for that unknown in the equation. He saw the equation of storytelling, the equation of solving the mystery of what the answer was. He loved the creativity that could be involved in that and the discoverability. So he made me look at math the way that I looked at writing. He brought it home for me. I actually then recognized, and no, I don't love math the way he does, but I recognized how he saw it and what he valued in it. And that was an important lesson for me, to understand that you can have a differing perspective about things and tastes and likes, pineapple on pizza, yes or no, etc. But you could still respect the person who likes the pineapple on pizza, and respect the person who can't stand pineapple on pizza. That their perspectives are, you can still communicate with them. But he did that sort of thing to me. He helped me see the world in new ways, even if they weren't ways that I would see the world. I would understand other people could see them that way. He did that for me in so many ways over the years. So, like I said, he was a student advisor. I worked with him on the student council for various school projects and even community projects. I got to work with Jim on stage shows and writing parody and comedy and sketches. We wrote so many sketches together. Levack District High School did not have a drama program while I was there. I would have loved the drama program because I didn't get to do a drama program until I went to university. I went to Sauk and Buskin drama program at Carleton University in Ottawa. But there was no drama program. But we did have things like the Christmas assembly was a big assembly, which is a combination of music, like band, like the band, and other musical performances, as well as a variety show, almost like a Saturday Night Live style variety show. And every once in a while, we did some community shows. The Iron Broom, we did a live event for that. Iron Broom was a golf and curling tournament that happened in the fall in Onaping Falls, the community that Levac was a part of every year. Jim was involved in that, and again, he was very much a stage presence because he was a DJ. So these shows were just a lot of fun to work on with Jim, and it felt like, I don't know what it's like to be in a writer's room, but sitting around with Jim and Martha and some of the other students that I worked with on these projects was just such a fun process. We'd sit around a table and someone would spit out an idea, and then we'd bounce the ideas back and forth, and then we'd start writing the dialogue together. And I still have so many of the scripts from those days. Just absolutely love them. So I got to work on those shows, and Jim was always a central part of it because, oh my God, did the man ever love to laugh, and he loved to make other people laugh. And I can still hear his laugh to this day. Sorry. Okay, I'll try not to break down, but yeah, I can still hear that laugh today, and it obviously sets me off because it brings back such warm memories. Give me 1 second here. But I always also remember, sitting in Jim's basement. So he had a house with his wife and his children, and he had the veritable man cave basement with large screen TV, state-of-the-art stereo system, because music was critical and important to him, and it was an amazing stereo system. A satellite feed, and this is back in the days when there was a gigantic satellite dish in your backyard, and you actually had to crank it and turn it and stuff like that to get different channels before the more commercial satellite TVs came on. A pool table and a bar. He even had a urinal installed because there were so many guys there, and probably his wife was tired of them not putting the seat down in the guest bathroom downstairs or whatever, so he had a urinal put in too. But Jim loved to entertain people. I think one of the reasons that he liked entertaining people and having people over is he got to include Cora, his wife, in it, and his daughter Vicky. Well, Lisa was born when I was in grade 13, so she was just a baby then. But his daughter Vicky, who also always has had an amazing sense of humor, a wry sense of humor. She still cracks me up. But anyways, I think he liked having people over because he could entertain and he could include his family in those things. He didn't have to go away like sometimes, guys' night out and stuff like that. Jim was very much a family man who loved the women in his family. So we would put together dances downstairs in his basement, teen dances and school dances, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But also workshopping various skits and stage shows. So many times writing skits with Jim reminded me, like I said, of what I thought it might be like to work on as one of the actors or writers on SNL. Because we also, a lot of us, Jim didn't really go on stage much. He always stayed behind the scenes. But students played numerous roles in the skits that we did. We would put skits together, barely practice them, put 1 or 2 rehearsals, and then they'd be performed live in just a few days. I love that. And Jim would sit in this central basement area in the captain's chair, Captain James T. Well, Jim Turcott, but because he was a Star Trek fan, and that was a great place just to see him there, and he just loved having people around him there. Now, some of the jokes that Jim came up with during these sessions still hit me to this day. Even the stuff that never made it into a skit, like the jokes we kind of just bounced and they just never got written down or whatever, I still think of some of those skits. But some of the brainstorming, like one of the ones that comes to me is that we had this thought of doing like a bingo for war vets concept where, and again, a little dark humor there, but the whole idea is B-52, and then of course the vets are thinking that B-52's coming in, and then when they call the letters, it sounds like incoming, and then you see them all diving for cover. So we thought it was in poor taste, so we didn't do it. But we came up with so many fun skits like that just, again, it's 30 years later, I'm still remembering them, and it wasn't just his skill at finding the perfect laugh in a situation. Oh, I mean, he also made me clean up some of my jokes. There's a skit I wrote, And I remember my friend JP was in that one, and the idea was a guy goes to brush his teeth, and then he starts spitting stuff out, and he's like, "Oh my God, what is this?" And he was like, "Oh, I mistook the preparation H for my toothpaste again," and he's like, "Oh, I wish someone would do something about that." And then the narrator comes over the loudspeaker and says, "Well, Mr. Smith, somebody has introducing," it was a combination of preparation H and Colgate, and I called it Holgate. And that was my original script. And Jim made me change it because he thought it would be too offensive. Holgate, preparation H and Colgate. He thought that was a little bit too risque and adult. Again, this was 1988. You could probably get away with that now, today. But he made me change it, and we came up with another name. We came up with Aqua H, preparation H, and Aqua Fresh, right? That kind of thing. Anyways, he kept us in line. He didn't let us get too silly, but he loved to laugh. And his passion for delivery and his eagerness to share the laugh and spread the joy was something I always remember him for. And to me, that defines a really good deal about the personal side of a man I have always looked up to. Now, as I mentioned, Jim was a DJ. Because his last name was Turcott, he had a theme. His company was called Dr. T. And that was his thing. It was like Dr. T's and, in the house doing the DJ stuff. And I had the distinct pleasure of being his assistant in his DJ business for, oh my God, at least a half dozen years, if not more. And he toured the Sudbury region, again, as Dr. T. He did high school, he did teen dances, did graduations, he did weddings, he did company parties, all kinds of celebrations. And I traveled all over the Sudbury region with him to all these different halls, setting up the speakers and doing the setting everything up, running the shows with him. I learned so much about how to read a crowd and how music, how all those different songs in different order are like storytelling. Do you see how almost every single thing I learned from Jim comes back to the craft I love so much? It's like Mr. Miyagi with his wax on, wax off, right? Those movements, those things. Jim was like my Mr. Miyagi, who had these ways of having me do math formulas and recognizing that the formula is not all that different than the formula of storytelling, and all these things that he didn't realize or realized he was teaching. I didn't realize I was learning at the time, but. We did some long distance shows where we didn't get home till 4 a.m. or whatever because we had to drive after tearing things down. After usually the things would end around 1 o'clock, and sometimes we'd do an encore and people would still be partying or whatever, dancing and stuff, and then you wouldn't be tearing down till like 2 a.m. But I'll never forget this one thing I learned from Jim, and I still do this to this day, is when we're driving, there's lots of farmers' fields and stuff in the greater Sudbury area. And usually at that certain time of year when you see those bundles of hay in the farmers' fields, the round bundles that you would see, Jim, as we're driving, he would just in the middle of, we were just silent or in the middle of talking, he would just shout out and exclaim, "Hey!" and point at the hay in the field, and sometimes scare the crap out of everyone in the car. And then he would laugh, and then of course we would laugh, roll our eyes, and go, "Oh my God, such a dad joke!" And of course, I do that all the time. I do it to Liz, drives her nuts. I do it to Alexander all the time, drives him nuts as well. So every time I do that, I am conjuring up 100% Jim Turcott love for just that sort of passion. Anyways, so this was back in the days. So the DJs, we did cassettes. So he would buy albums, actual LPs, vinyl albums. Yeah, CDs weren't even a thing then. They were just on the cusp. And so we had these cassettes, and you'd put about 22 sides on each song. And then he would record the songs. So he had all these cassettes, and it would be like JT01 in a year or something like that, and then JT02, and then side A, side B, AB, etc. And then each track would have a number. And so he had this database and this song booklet. And my friend Greg Roberts, who was a genius computer programmer back when, this is early days of basic computer programming. So Greg was one of those really brilliant guys. And Jim marked, when he did calculus, I think it was grade 13 calculus, grade 12 calculus. One of the calculuses, one of the blocks he wanted computer programming, because he said, computers are going to be a big thing. I want you guys to do that. So for calculus, you're doing computer programming. Nobody's going to fail. I'm going to grade everyone on a curve. And I think what he had Greg do, because he knew Greg was just genius, is Greg helped tutor and help the other students because he knew so much about computers. But then I think for his grade, I think Greg made a database for him. Like, instead of doing the standard assignment, he knew Greg was well above that, so he had Greg do something a little bit more advanced. And of course, on the curve, Greg did really, really well. Anyways, so he did this database so Jim could enter his song titles, etc. in the database, and then he printed out, and it was in like a duotang booklet, that it would be sorted by artist name, and then also sorted, second half of the book was sorted by song title. So people could look up songs that they wanted. And of course, he would refresh that every once in a while when he had to add stuff to it. But to plan a dance, we'd write out a song list and then on our foolscap sheets. And there'd be a note that would say, okay, so once this song finishes, so you'd start off with, let's say, the opening of the dance. You got to sort of warm them up. No one's really going to dance right away necessarily, especially with the older people. So you'd warm them up with, like, something like Walk of Life by Dire Straits, and just songs that people know and are very familiar but aren't really huge dance tunes, just to get them kind of bop it in their chair a little bit, and then you warm them up, and then you hit them with a real powerful set at the end. But you write out the song list and you would say, play Dire Straits' Walk of Life. And again, the cassettes were random. Like, as he got new songs, he would just add the new singles or the new whatever to the end of the tape, and when it filled up, you started a new tape, and Nate gave it a naming convention. So you'd finish Dire Straits' Walk of Life, and then you would cut to, I don't know, a song from Dirty Dancing, Time of My Life, or something like that, and then it would say, when you finish that song, cue it to Had the Time of My Life, which is on side 2, track 3. And so when you finished that, you would switch decks. The other deck would be live, and then I think we had a magnet that identified which deck was live to the floor and which one I was queuing stuff up on. Because then you'd queue it up, and then you'd flip again to play the next track, and then you would flip, and you're constantly queuing up to the next songs. You would run to. So we had a terminology called run to or cue to. So a run to was when the track was somewhere else on that cassette, and a cue to meant that the song that was going to be played next in line sometime later was the next song, but there's usually a second or two space, so you would queue up to just before it started. And again, this was a complex structure. It was a math equation, but it was also storytelling. And he had about 4 hardback briefcases of cassettes. And like I said, they fit about 22 songs on each side. And then names like Jim 01 or Old Jim 12 and stuff like that. And then the directory would reference them. So Jim 01A16 would mean cassette Jim 01, side A, track 16. Now, before I left town, before I left Levac to go to Ottawa to university, Jim made me a mixtape of some of my all-time favorite songs at the time. And of course, as a tip of my hat to Jim's categorization system, I called this cassette JTFML 88. And it's Jim Turcott for Mark Lefebvre, 1988. And it's still one of my most precious cassettes, and I still have it. In fact, I'll find a picture of it to post to the show notes for this. I learned so much about DJing from Jim. How to set up dances, how to interview people, like for a wedding. Interview them to find out the taste of the music of the bride, and groom, and their friends and family, but also favorites of their parents and their friends and all those people. I learned how to read a crowd and play off the nonverbal feedback. I learned how to take requests in a way that everyone who left the stage was satisfied, even if you didn't end up playing the exact song they requested. Because sometimes you either didn't have the song or that song wouldn't work. And you found something that would work, that they would like. And so they at least left happy. And I learned that, which came in so handy in my years in customer service over the years. My best friend Steve and I actually had our own DJ operation in Ottawa for several years, and we were living there together. And it was modeled on Jim's operation. We called ourselves Stark Entertainment. Yes, that is where Stark Stark Reflections on Writing and Publishing, Stark Publishing. That's where my company, Stark, which I founded in 2004, that's where it came from. Because Steve and Mark. Steve got the first 2 letters, I got the last 3. Stark Entertainment was our company, was our dream. Steve even designed the Stark Publishing logo for me. Now, Steve, like Jim, is an acoustic expert. He handled the balancing and all the sound. Like, he just knew the sound stuff. I just knew the music stuff. Right? I'm not good at sound engineering or anything like that. So I was the tape runner, queuing up tapes, and Jim or Steve would be operating all of the buttons and knobs and volume control and all that stuff. Now, that was something that I took with me, and Steve and I got to use. But like I said, Jim was also a huge fan of movies. He loved classic science fiction. He loved the original Star Trek series. I think I'd started to get into Star Trek Next Generation, and he was the ones like, no, you got to check out the writing of the original series. It's so good. And I spent so much time in his basement watching classic episodes, gaining an appreciation for Star Trek, and I already like science fiction, but gaining an appreciation for some of the movies as well. And like I said, I always thought of that big comfy armchair in the center of his basement as his captain's chair for the Starship Turcott. Like I said, he was a huge family man, and his wife Cora and his daughters Vicky and Lisa are absolutely amazing people. I love them all dearly. They're wonderful folks, and I know Jim adored them to the ends of this earth. We weren't in touch often over the years. We actually corresponded by email a little bit about 3 years before he passed away. And one of my true highlights, when I launched my very first published book under the Stark Publishing imprint, One Hand Screaming, in 2004, it was Thanksgiving weekend 2004, because I was in town to visit my parents, and Jim showed up. And he was lined up. I didn't see him. He was lined up behind. I actually had a big lineup of people because hometown pride, hometown boy. It's a new book. Everyone's excited. It was actually, the newspapers covered it. The radio covered it. For some reason, it was a big deal. There was actually a lineup of people, which is kind of rare for me for a book signing. But he's lined up. I didn't see him. He's behind this big line of people. And I'm signing books there. And then when the person in front of him, I signed books, said goodbye to her, when she stepped away, there was Jim. The smile. Oh, a smile I knew so well. I think I actually embarrassed him, because the moment I saw that smile, I couldn't stop myself from jumping up from behind the table and giving him a giant hug. And I'm so glad that I did it, because regardless of all the years and the laughs and the fun, all the time we spent together, he knew. But guys didn't talk about stuff like that. So that hug was the closest I ever came to telling him how much he meant to me, how much I loved him. But guys are not supposed to show their emotions. They're supposed to be tough and subdued and reserved. At least that's how I was raised as a boy. But seriously, if you don't take the time to tell the people in your life just how much they mean to you, how important they are to you, who are you saving it for? What are you saving it for? So I am so glad I gave Jim a big hug. So he knew. So with that, I hope you appreciated my sharing my inspiration for just what I got and all the things I learned from Jim Turcott. He was a fantastic teacher and mentor, an incredible friend, a dear friend, and And I cherish the memories of all the time we spent together. So much that he taught me. And in particular, his love of life and sharing laughter. So when I was a young man, I wanted to be like Jim when I grew up. It was one of the reasons I have a bar in my house. And if I ever do grow up, I may be like him one day. But like I said, he gave me so much. I still carry so much of Jim with me to this day. And that is why this episode is thanks for the inspiration, Jim Turcott. Well, that's the end of this episode. That's the end of it's just a one giant reflection, so there's no post-main content reflection here. I hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you enjoy the Stark Reflections podcast. If you want to support me, if you want to say thanks because you got some sort of inspiration, you can leave a review for this podcast on whatever place you listen to your podcasts on. You can also share it with someone that you think would find value in it. Of course, there's the patreon.com/starkreflections. There's even a link to buy me a coffee. And thank you to the awesome folks who have bought me a coffee. I may have used some of it for beer money, but we'll just call it coffee, right? In any case, thanks so much for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. And until next week and next episode, this is Mark Leslie Lefebvre wishing you great writing and good Stark Reflections.
Thank you for listening to the Stark Reflections podcast. You can find show notes for each episode at starkreflections.ca.
The music for this podcast, Laser Groove, was composed and produced by Kevin MacLeod. Check out more of Kevin's great music at incomptech.com.